gov, yeah.
Yeah, they're. They're coming in a second.
Out of your shot, Chris.
No, you're right.
Let me open the door in a second.
Should be coming any second. Doesn't have as far to walk as he did in Gardner.
Is he not there?
Times are perfect.
It's nice to see the early birds here.
No coffee.
Sorry.
Every page.
Every page. Every page.
Every page of the cover.
You read it.
I was wondering where the other budget people went. I don't see them. Can you give one of these to Brad? One of them to Heffernan? Thank you. Somebody go file that, please. So good morning. We're pleased to be signing the fiscal year 2023 budget, which supports tax relief efforts and delivers investments in a variety of key areas of state government, including significant increases in education funding at both the K through 12 and higher ed level, child care investments, and big increases in local aid to our cities and towns. Over the past 7 years, we've always spent less than we raised in taxes, and that's made a big difference in getting our budget structurally balanced. When we took office, we started with a budget deficit of varying proportions depending upon how you do the math, and the rainy day fund had somewhere around $1 billion in it. At this point in time, the rainy day fund has almost $7 billion in it, and we've been in structural balance now for the past 4 or 5 years. This budget contains about $1 billion in one-time spending, which involves a whole series of transfers to reserves, pilot programs, pandemic recovery initiatives, and other elements such as investments in the pension system, or investments in the pension system that go over and above the formula that we typically use to invest in the pension system, a one-time increase in funding support for the MBTA, and a whole series of other initiatives. We believe it's affordable. We believe it's appropriate given the time we're in, and the budget also assumes that we will be providing permanent tax cuts to the people of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Some of the details: it does fund the Landmark Student Opportunity Act at about $652 million, which is a very significant increase over last year, consistent with the law. There's also a $110 million pilot free school meal program for students in K through 12 education. In early education and childcare, it's the largest early education and childcare budget we've ever done. It's $1.2 billion, including a $250 million stabilization grant fund and a $60 million increase in rates for center-based providers. In higher education, it's about $1.6 billion, more than $190 million to support financial aid, and that includes an expansion of the Mass Grant program, which will enable all low-income in-state undergraduate students to attend public higher education without incurring debt for mandatory tuition and mandatory fees, which we think is a big win. That's something we've been moving toward over the course of the past several years. Local government is going to receive $1.2 billion in unrestricted general government aid, which is consistent with the proposal and the commitment that the Lieutenant Governor and I made back when we took office, that we would always increase local aid at the start of the budget process by at least whatever the projected growth in state tax revenue was going to be. Housing and homelessness gets one of the biggest increases and the biggest budgets they've ever had. It's about $885 million, and that's for a number of reasons, a lot of which has to do with significant investments in continuing to support our rental assistance for families program, which we dramatically expanded during the pandemic to make sure that people, as part of our eviction diversion program, will be able to stay in their homes, in their apartments. It also includes $219 million for emergency assistance for the family shelter system, $150 million for MRVP support to more than 10,000, which will translate into more than 10,000 vouchers in 2023, and about $110 million for the homeless individual shelter program, which is a significant increase there as well. The only other part I just want to mention briefly, it also includes $230 million as an increase in Chapter 257 Human Service Provider funding. For those with short memories, when we took office, the provider community was suing state government over the fact that state government had not implemented the Chapter 257 law, which was enacted in about 2008 or 9. And the point behind that law was to make sure that state spending continued to support community-based programs that provide services to people with disabilities and people with mental health issues and other concerns and problems. Many providers in the child welfare system participate in this program, but the whole idea was to make sure that state spending for these programs basically tracked in some respects to the growth in the cost of operating these programs. It had never been adequately funded. The provider community took the state to court. We settled that suit shortly after we took office, and every year since then, we have lived up to the requirements and the promise of what 257 was all about, and that's translating for next year into a $230 million increase in that budget. It also includes a $115 million increase to expand outpatient and urgent behavioral health services at Mass Health, plus $50 million to support similar programming at the Department of Mental Health, as well as a loan forgiveness program for clinical healthcare workers in the behavioral health space. We fully funded the Turning 22 program again. We remain the only administration to ever do that as part of our budget. And in substance addiction prevention and treatment services, when we took office, the Commonwealth was spending somewhere in the vicinity of $120 million on these programs annually. We'll be spending $600 million on these programs in this fiscal year, which translates obviously into a very significant increase in support for those programs over the course of the past few years. Let me just close by saying that we believe that we have done, with our colleagues in the legislature and our team, a very good job of working the Commonwealth out of a structural deficit and with a very small rainy day fund, and where people were using the rainy day fund basically to balance the budget, not for the purpose to which it was intended. And over the course of the last 8 years, working with our colleagues in the legislature, we've gone to the point now where we are very structurally balanced. We have a very significant rainy day fund, and based on the performance of our economy and our tax collections for the last fiscal year, we do believe there'll be a significant return to the taxpayers according to existing state law sometime later this year. And with that, I will turn it over to Lieutenant Governor.
Thank you, Governor. Good morning, everyone. As the Governor noted, this budget is affordable, it's structurally balanced. It also contains close to $1 billion in one-time expenditures and investments, which is an important note as you look forward to always be cautious about building up base level spending, which is an important message as we transition out of office and prepare for the new administration coming in. I'm particularly pleased that we continue to invest in the pillars of what make our Commonwealth strong, in particular the investments in our communities, a $500 million increase in local Chapter 70 aid for early education, $250 million to stabilize early education and child care, which is incredibly important, especially with post-pandemic conditions around how people work, and the $60 million for provider rate increases for a population of workers that we clearly need to help us continue to solve those problems for working families. For workforce, career technical initiative and our Mass Hire one-stop career centers are working nonstop to plug in unemployed and underemployed to important jobs that employers all across our Commonwealth need filled. A lot of investment in economic recovery, tourism, and hospitality sectors, which were hard hit in the pandemic. $63 million increase in local aid, again, as the Governor noted, building on our commitment to helping our communities plan for their future with certainty, and a particular program that I have worked hard on with municipal leaders, which is the Community Compact Program. I'm grateful to the legislative leaders for incorporating continued funding to the tune of $20 million for these important best practices initiatives that have strengthened municipal government. The Governor noted important investments in RAFT and home base and substance misuse. And particularly, I want to thank my colleagues in the legislature for their investments in sexual assault and domestic violence. As the chair of that council since 2015, we have more than doubled the amount of investments in this area, now at the rate of $132 million. And also with the legislature working to target human trafficking and adding $1.5 million for specific measures, working with our partners in community and law enforcement partners to combat that. The Black and Advisory Commission and Latino Advisory Commission have been very helpful to our administration in identifying priorities for that community, and I was very pleased to see $50 million incorporated into the budget so we can address some of their highest priorities. With that, I just want to close by saying thank you to the entire ANF team, Catherine Hornby, Bran, and all of you working so hard with a lot of moving pieces over these final days of the legislative session. We appreciate your dedication, and it's my pleasure to now turn it over to Secretary Heffernan.
I just want to quickly thank the Governor and Lieutenant Governor for, again, their leadership.
Why don't you come stand over here?
Here we go.
Oh, okay, never mind. Put it on top of the budget, which for you is probably where it belongs.
I'm not that tall to begin with. I just wanted to quickly thank the Governor and Lieutenant Governor for their continued leadership in the administration and the budgeting process. And in especially, a thank you to our secretaries and agency heads who have been great partners through the process. And as the Governor has said many times, the state is run by, a core of hardworking, dedicated folks. And you need to look no farther than our budget and legal teams. Catherine Hornby, our Undersecretary, Bran Shim, our Budget Director, Rick McCoulis, and Connor Sameo, who are our ADs, and then our legal team led by John Steffen, Cassandra Rutter, and Patrick Lynch. And hold on, who did I miss? I said Bran, didn't I? Oh, sorry, Sarah. Sarah's been doing double duty for us too, so it's doubly bad that I missed her. Also want to thank our partners in the legislature. It's been a tremendous process, and as the Governor pointed out, the Stabilization Fund is now knocking on $7 billion, and this budget does contemplate the Stabilization Fund ending fiscal 23 at $8.4 billion. And with that, I'll turn it back over to the Governor and Lieutenant Governor.
Thanks, Mike, to you and to Catherine and Brand and the rest of the team. Thank you as well. There's many more of them who aren't here, and I hope you pass our gratitude on to your colleagues. Questions?
Governor, you returned the outside section with amendments, phone calls for inmates. Are you looking for your entire dangerousness bill or just parts of it?
So we returned what I would consider to be a much more narrow version of our dangerousness bill. But we make pretty clear in the amendment letter that we thought the comments of Chair Eldridge and Chair Day were harsh, cold, and callous in the way they responded to the survivors who came to the State House to express their dismay about that legislation being sent to study. The Lieutenant Governor and I have spent a lot of time over the past few years with people who, with very real life experience and the trauma to go along with it, feel they've been let down and in some cases abandoned by the Commonwealth when they've dealt with some very violent and very difficult and enormously troubling circumstances and situations. We are free game. You can say whatever you want about us, about our motives, about our intent, about our intelligence. That's just part of the way this process works. But for two gentlemen who hold very important positions in this legislature to come out and accuse those folks, the survivors, who had the guts to come here and testify in this building, which they consider to be a place that's been of no help to them, to come and testify and to speak again to the trauma that was inflicted upon them, and still in many cases is something they worry about every day, was an act of tremendous bravery and courage. And that's how it should have been appreciated and understood. And to basically say that they were part of a PR stunt is just disgraceful. So yeah, we filed a narrow version of it, but we filed it with language that I think makes clear that we think the legislature owes those folks an apology. At least those two gentlemen owe those people an apology.
What are some of the highlights in that amendment that you want?
Well, the first piece is, if somebody cuts off their ankle bracelet, that should be a crime. It's not in Massachusetts. And time again, these survivors talked about the fact that somebody who had an ankle bracelet cut it off and then began following them around, harassing them, doing everything, in some cases actually attacking them. And it's not a crime, which obviously doesn't make a heck of a lot of sense to us. If somebody does engage, and if they violate a restraining order, if they do a number of things that are clearly indicative of an attempt to intimidate the person who's actually had the courage to file charges against them, there should be an opportunity for the court to have a hearing on whether or not this person should continue to have the ability to do this before their trial. I think in addition to that, we included language that would have expanded some of the categories. And there's actually a lot of support in the legislature to include things like child sexual assault, child trafficking, child pornography, crimes against children, basically, as part of this as well. And I think the other big one was to take the 90-day and the 180-day piece, which is the current limit on it, and to basically say at a minimum you should at least have another hearing, but we would prefer if they just actually held them until actually they had trial. They had their trial.
Have you or any of your deputies heard from Chairman Day, from Chairman Eldridge since Monday about if they're open to a narrower bill, or if there's any chance of the legislature? Or
Well, the letter we sent back also says that, I haven't heard directly from them. I don't know if they've talked, do you know if they've talked to Secretary Reedy?
Secretary Reedy.
Okay. They have talked to Secretary Reedy. They had said that their public comments were that they would be, they would have been, I think is the way they put it, willing to support a more narrow bill.
Given the time left remaining on the legislative calendar, Governor, do you see this as essentially saying that the legislature, you can have the free prison and no calls only
I'm hoping that they choose to do the right thing here.
Governor, how much of criminal history is included in your report?
Say again?
Looking at somebody's criminal history as opposed to just looking at the current event, that would maybe consider trigger dangerousness hearing. How much does criminal history factor in?
It's not. We took it out.
Okay. What's the reason for that?
Pardon me?
What is the reason for taking that out?
That was one of the things several people in the legislature said was concerning to them.
Can I ask about the state tax revenue cap that you mentioned a little bit?
Sure.
earlier? What would be the estimated total, are you estimating for those rebates, if we're hitting that cap? And when did your administration become aware that we were doing that?
Well, it's obviously something we've been tracking for a while. We get a report every year from the state auditor in September that basically lays out the whether or not, in fact, we did hit it. I think the $2 billion surge in April was certainly kind of eye-opening in tax collections. But it's one of those things that's just part of the year-end wrap-up with respect to how we go about figuring out what we can put in a final deficiency, that kind of stuff. So it's fairly recent. But we think the number's probably north of $2.5 billion that would be in tax rebates to the people in Massachusetts.
Is there a reason why the legislature doesn't upload about this earlier and they were passing their budgets?
Well, they get the same reports that we get from the auditor, and obviously you can't calculate or estimate. The auditor's number is going to be the final call on this, but the actual number itself is, you can't really calculate it till you get to the end of the fiscal year.
And how would those rebates work if it's north of $2.5 billion? Would that just be split evenly between taxpayers as one-time checks, or would that be a system of credits they claim on their 2023 tax returns?
I believe it's a rebate that goes out after the auditor submits her report in September. But that's something I think Mike's folks can probably
It's
talk to
actually the
people about.
legislature, the statute goes back to 1986. It's actually unclear. It happened once in 1987. It was done as a credit.
But then it was like 14 cents.
Yeah, it was $29 million, 14 million or so claimed. And so we're looking in that, as DOR did the calculation, and we did talk to the legislature about the number when we did the calculation. We're looking at, what's the quickest and most efficient way to get that money back to the taxpayers.
So this cap hasn't been hit since 1987?
Yeah.
Yep.
I would refer to the auditor report. Every year has a history and some graphics in there that does a very good job of explaining.
Governor, does this tax cap issue affect tax breaks that are sort of moving it through the legislature these last few days?
The tax breaks that are currently pending before the legislature are eminently affordable within the context of the rest of this. I mean, you're talking about a tax year, this past year, in which tax revenue went up by over 20%, which came on the heels of a tax revenue increase in the previous year that went up by 15%. I mean, these are sort of unprecedented increases in tax revenue, which is in some ways exactly what this thing was designed to ensure that people in Massachusetts participated in that windfall.
Governor, we've been reporting that there are 2 other big bills on your desk. I don't see them on the desk, I'm sure. The reproductive rights and the private bill. That was Sunday, I believe, acted sooner, and then we had a chance to look at them.
We have, we're looking through both bills. The climate bill's pretty complicated, and it doesn't really look like, I mean, it's a conference committee report, so it doesn't really look like our bill, the House bill, or the Senate bill. And we're also looking through the reproductive rights bill. And I think our hope is that we can get those 2 done before we get to the end of the session.
Last question.
Governor, can you speak to the amendment to bring back the happy hour?
I'm not I was around when we had happy hours, and they were the precursor of a lot of traffic accidents and in some cases fatalities, which is why they were eliminated in the first place. And I would be, I'm definitely a hard sell on going back to them, and I'm particularly a hard sell because a variety of traffic safety and highway safety bills that we filed over the past couple of years haven't gone anywhere. So we haven't really done much to make our roads safer, and that's actually proven out in the data. The last couple of years have been among the most deadly on our highways and roadways in recent memory, and almost all of them involve speed. So I think I mean, obviously, we'll wait and see what we get from the legislature, as we always do, but I'm not inclined to support a return.
Governor, the legislature took a vote as soon as today on a soldiers' home reform bill that would, among many other things,
Yep.
elevate the Secretary of Veteran Services to the cabinet. Is that something you support for your successor? And do you have any thoughts on how long it took to get this over the finish line? It's been more than 2 years since the outbreak of polio prompted multiple investigations.
Well, I'm going to wait till I see the bill before we make any decisions about it and have a chance to review it. I will say that I know I speak for the Lieutenant Governor, myself, and the rest of the administration. We were very much hoping that this was one of the conference committees that would find a way to reach agreement and legislation would get to our desk on this so we could sign it. The issue itself, obviously, is borne out from some of the confusion around who reported to who and who talked to who and what the chain of command was during the early days of the pandemic when this terrible tragedy occurred. And I'm certainly hoping that the final version of this will address all of those issues because they're important.
Thanks, everyone.
Could you speak to the internal investigation at the State Police Academy regarding the unauthorized training?
You know, the academy training is, in many respects, the way we introduce recruits to the sort of goals and objectives and attitude and culture of the Mass State Police. And one of the reasons, and I know I speak for the Lieutenant Governor on this, one of the reasons that Colonel Mason was a very attractive candidate to us when he interviewed for the job was he talked a lot about the fact that that training academy is a very important place to send a message to new recruits and, frankly, to send a message to folks who go back for in-service training about the attitude and the culture of the organization. And he talked a lot to both of us about the fact that it needed to be less of a militaristic approach and more of a community-based, community policing approach with real focus on tools and capabilities and policies around de-escalation and collaboration and this story, as it plays out, as I understand it, is clearly not consistent with the way the Colonel organized and has operated the training academy since he became the Colonel. So I'm glad it's under investigation, and I have full faith that he will do the right thing with respect to what should happen here.
Thanks,
Do you
everyone.
think the sports betting bill will make it to your desk, the sports betting bill, do you think that will make it to your desk, or was it going to be offered to conference committee members who are still very much in the thick of negotiations with a few days left?
Do you want to bet on the sports betting bill?
I would. Give me one of those.
I think there are a lot of people in the legislature who think this is a worthwhile thing to do. Even some of the folks who aren't wild about betting and gambling generally understand that it's going on all over New England already and around the rest of the country. I certainly hope it makes it to the desk. I do know that there are very significant conversations going on between the branches about this. So it's clearly still on people's radar, and it is very much on people's to-do list.
Can the state afford the $2 billion these days?
Yeah, we have a 20% increase in tax revenue this year. We had a 15% increase last year. We've put gobs of money into our stabilization fund. I just signed a budget that's got a 9% increase in it that we believe is absolutely affordable. And like I said, the tax increases, how much is a 20% increase in taxes in raw numbers?
I have to go to the.
Catherine, Brian, give me a number. It's
40 to 50. Roughly, 40 to 50.
It's $6 billion, okay? I mean, it's an enormous number. The permanent tax increases, or excuse me, the permanent tax reductions that we proposed were around $700 million, which is reasonably consistent with where the legislature's proposals on the House and Senate have been. And this thing is, as I said, is north of $2.5 billion. There's a lot of room there. And And we certainly believe there will still be room in a final deficiency to put some additional resources into the T and to do some other things as well. So yeah, we think it's affordable.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, folks. I appreciate you coming in early.
I'm going to spend July next July.
Probably not, yeah. Yeah. I apologize for doing this early, but I have to go hop on a plane and go to Washington. So.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you. Thank you. And Anisha, I just gotta run. Thank you.
Yeah.